Welcome to the first episode in our southwestern Queensland trip. We leave behind the rich green countryside of southern Queensland and make our way along the Warrego Highway that takes its name from the Warrego River, which is the end point of the highway, and on to Dalby. We bypass Oakey and continue on towards Dalby through Jundarian and Bowenville. We travel through some of the best farming country on the western slopes of the Great Dividing Range. The region has a strong and diverse agricultural industry, largely due to the extensive areas of reasonably fertile black soil and the availability of water. Manufacturing and mining are also important to the region, as is coal seam gas extraction. Dalby, located on Myall Creek, is a large and prosperous rural service centre located in an area of fertile volcanic soil. It is surrounded by fields of wheat, cotton, mung beans, sunflowers, sorghum, millet and barley. Although the area is known as Queensland's wheat centre, as it has the state's largest grain retrieval centre, it also produces stud cattle, sheep, pigs and Angora goats. Added to this is its importance as a centre for natural gas, coal and power generation. From Dalby we made our way along the Dalby-Kogan Road, crossing the Condamine River, a tributary of Darling River, and is part of the Condamine-Belong catchment, one of the largest catchments in the Murray-Darling Basin. The main rivers of the catchment are the Condamine and the Maranoa. Kogan on Kogan Creek is part of the Surat Basin and was a changing station on the Dalby-Roma coach route prior to the construction of the Western Railway line. The Shire of Kogan is shaped like an upside-down U, with the Shire of Beelby almost enclosed within the Shire. As we were aiming to camp for the day just outside of Condamine at Callagall Lagoon, we continued on through Kogan. The road in places had been impacted by the previous floods. Thankfully, there was little to no traffic. Rick and I had not been along this road, so it was interesting to see the changing countryside. We arrived in Condamine on the banks of the Condamine River just before midday. In 1872, the first European explorer, Allan Cunningham, passed through the area. Following this, the town of Condamine developed on the banks of the river as a stopping place for the bullock teams which moved through the area on their way to the larger centres of Roma and Longreach. The normally peaceful Condamine River flows close to homes and businesses in the town. When flooding in the surrounding catchment area spills into the river, it quickly becomes a torrent, showing no respect for human notions of property and boundaries. Beside the river is a plaque highlighting some of the snippets of folklore that remain about floods during the late 19th century. In Condamine Bell Park, a large replica of the bullfrog or Condamine Bell stands. There are plaques about the bell's history, which record that in 1867-68, a local blacksmith named Samuel Jones invented the Condamine bullfrog cowbell. It was made from either a cross-cut saw or a pit saw and tied around the necks of cattle and bullocks. The bells ensured that stockmen could locate cattle and were even able to determine the distance of a bullock by the sound of its bell. It is claimed that the ringing of the bell could be heard from 7 miles or just over 11 kilometres away. After spending some time in Condamine, we made our way along the Leichhardt Highway to Callagall Lagoon, where we made camp for the night. In the afternoon, not long after we had arrived, I went for a walk along the lagoon edge. It was such a tranquil spot. Later that afternoon, Rick and I wandered around camp and on our return ventured down to the lagoon. The storm clouds on the horizon were amazing, as were the reflections. The timing could not have been better, as what a difference a couple of hours could make. It was such a relaxing spot, even with about a dozen or so other campers. The next morning we headed towards Meandarra along the Condamine-Meandarra Road. The roadside was lined with eucalypt, false sandalwood, yellowwood, brigalow, bloodwoods, beelia and woodlands that made it difficult to see beyond the trees. But much of the country had been improved by clearing and burning. To to increase the palatable grass species for grazing by stock. Meandarra is on the banks of Brigalow Creek. During the 1860s and 1870s, early Europeans attempted to clear the dense brigalow scrubs around the area with axes. But brigalow, being a hardwood, was too hard to remove, and the areas were fenced off as waste country. Between 1880 and 1934, the southern brigalow belt was invaded by prickly pear. It wasn't until after World War II when brigalow development set a new pace, when land clearing contractor Sir Joby Peterson, later Premier of Queensland, pioneered a technique for quickly clearing scrub by connecting a heavy anchor chain between two bulldozers. Glenmorgan, located on the Surat Development Road, also known as Sybil Street within the town, houses the end-of-the-line museum in the former Glenmorgan railway station and was full of railway memorabilia. From Glenmorgan we made our way out to the heritage-listed Mile Park Botanic Gardens, which has one of Queensland's oldest collections of semi-arid plants, but unfortunately it was closed. From Glenmorgan we made our way along the Surat Development Road. The road we were now travelling varied in condition, from a narrow road without line markings with sharp steep edges to some wider sections recently bitumened, so we were quite happy to follow the water truck for quite a way before it turned off to a mining camp. On this leg of a trip I enjoyed seeing the contrast in the landscape as we passed through the area, the difference between the various grasses, the established natural versus the improved pasture, the cultivated versus the natural landscape, even the varied colours of the grasses and trees. There was always something to look at and to admire. Surat, on the Carnarvon Highway, is situated on the Balonne River, midway between St George and Roma on the Great Inland Way, and is steeped in history with links to Cobb & Co and the boom time of the wool industry. In Memorial Park we visited the simple sculpture of a tree with photographs of those people from Surat who served Australia in various wars. Interestingly, it wasn't until 1953 that electricity was connected to the town. While having morning tea, we were amused by the ambulance outside with Max tracks attached to the rear doors, a true indication of the versatility of people in the outback. After having coffee in the cafe, we ventured across the street to the museum in the old Cobb & Co changing station, the original site of the Cobb & Co store, and a drop-off point for coach travellers and goods, with its ever-changing displays depicting the lifestyles of yesteryear. The museum houses a number of permanent displays, including Changing Ways, which looks at the importance of Cobb & Co to the district, All Among the Wool, which has an exhibit about the local wool industry, Cobb Store, which looks at the importance of general stores in rural communities, The Wealth of Warroo, which covers the events, milestones and memories of the old Warroo Shire, and Following the Flow, which chronicles the role of the Murray-Darling River system and its importance as a natural resource. It also houses a 14-seater Cobb & Co coach, a 25,000-litre freshwater aquarium, a social history museum and the local art gallery. It is worth noting why Cobb & Co looms so large in the history of Surat. Fred, Tommy Thompson, was the last man to drive the Cobb & Co coach from Surat to its final destination at Yulbar in 1924. It was to be the last Cobb & Co stagecoach run in Australia. On leaving Surat, we were following the Carnarvon Highway, part of the Cobb & Co coach route. We did not expect to see a huge boat dipping along the highway towards us. The edges of the road were a little uneven, and the car and the boat were swaying as it came down the road. Thankfully, Gidget, aka the caravan, follows the boat, aka the car, easily. As we continued along the highway, our travels took us through ever-changing country. I loved seeing the paddocks with bottle trees, as I remembered them from my childhood, as well as the blade-ploughed country and open grazing paddocks. The first documented British explorers to enter the region were Sir Thomas Mitchell and Edmund Kennedy on their 1846 expedition. In 1848, Alan McPherson reached the region and laid claim to land which he called Mount Abundance Station, only to abandon the district after Aboriginal conflict. The first sign of a township occurred in 1861 when a couple of crude public houses were built near the Mount Abundance homestead. Roma has the distinction of being the first town gazetted in the new colony of Queensland, with the town being proclaimed a municipality in 1867. Henry Redford, or Captain Starlight, also plays a part in Roma's history, with his hilarious trial being held in the original Roma courthouse, though sadly no longer standing. In 1900, natural gas was discovered on Hospital Hill, and in 1906 an experimental farm researching wheat was opened, and a dairy co-op factory opened in 1909. Today, Roma is the centre of a rich pastoral and wheat growing district at the junction of the Warrego and Carnarvon highways. As we made our way into town, we passed the Roma sale yards, situated on almost 50 hectares, and is the largest cattle selling centre in the southern hemisphere, with over 400,000 head moving through the yards each year. We stopped and looked at many amazing creative entries in the sculpture competition that were on display beside the highway. There truly are some remarkably inspirationally creative people. While in Roma, we took a walk along the heritage-listed Heroes Avenue, planted with more than 100 bottle trees. Each tree is a memorial to a local soldier who lost their life in World War I. Originally, each tree bore a brass nameplate. Only one survives, and it has become part of a cane outside the post office, displaying all 93 names. The Big Rig Oil Patch Museum was an intriguing journey of twists and drama of when oil and gas first flowed in our nation. The story of oil and gas pioneers was brought alive through exhibits, machinery displays, and audio-visual features around the site. We visited the oil patch to get up close to impressive historical rigs, old-fashioned machinery that contributed to the oil and gas industry, and saw one of the first diesel-powered rigs ever used in Australia. Roma is known for its bottle trees, and we visited the huge tree in Edward Street that has a girth of just over 9.5 metres. We also visited the Roma Courthouse, where in 1873 the trial of the infamous Harry Redford, known as Captain Starlight, took place after the captain stole 1,000 cattle and drove them into South Australia. The main features of St Paul's Anglican Church are the superb stained glass windows, some of which were shipped from England in the 1870s. The current church replaced the timber church that was built in 1875. The main street is full of historic buildings, one of which is James Saunders Chemist, and it has been there continuously since James Saunders, his name is above the awning, established his chemist and dentist business on the site in 1871. It is claimed to be Australia's longest surviving continuous pharmacy site. There are over 25 places of interest in Roma, but I have only touched on a few of the historical things we saw. Roma is sometimes called the capital of the Western Downs and has considerable pride in the fact that it was the first place in the vast Surat Basin to discover gas and oil. The Surat Basin is a geological basin in eastern Australia that is part of the Great Artesian Basin. The Surat Basin extends across an area of 270,000 square kilometres, and the southern third of the basin occupies a large part of northern New South Wales, with the remainder in Queensland. Towns situated above the basin, once dominated by agriculture, are experiencing a boom as mines and infrastructure in the area are expanded. Since the early 2000s, coal seam gas, also known as coal bed methane, has been produced from multiple fields across the basin. These fields presently supply both the domestic market, including a number of power stations and the Roma to Brisbane pipeline, and the liquefied national gas plant located on Curtis Island near Gladstone, where it is exported to international markets. Rick and I enjoyed our short stay in Roma, but it was time to move on further west. On leaving Roma, we made our way past the giant Southern Cross windmill, which was built in 1950 with blades that are 9 metres across and stands 15 metres high, and is the largest commercially made windmill in Australia. A little further out of town, we passed Mount Abundance Homestead, a heritage listed homestead built circa 1860 to 1923. The homestead is a single-storey timber homestead built for Stephen Spencer, a squatter from New South Wales, who arrived in Queensland in 1857 and acquired the property from Alan McPherson, who had abandoned the property following constant conflict with the local Indigenous people. We continue on through Muckadilla with its whistle-stop railway siding and native gardens alongside the highway. The name Muckadilla was first used as the creek name, which in turn is believed to be an Aboriginal word to mean plenty of water. From Muckadilla we made our way to Amby, originally called Amby Creek, that became a township in 1883. Amby forms part of the eastern boundary of the Outback region and can be best described as where the grain and grazing belts meet. We continued on through Amby to Mitchell on the banks of the Maranoa River. The town services the adjoining communities of Amby, Muckadilla and Mungalala. The main attraction in Mitchell is the Great Artesian Spa, a hot spring that comes from the Artesian Basin beneath the town. We stopped and stretched our legs in Mitchell with a walk along the Maranoa River, up under the bridge and back to the park. After our short break, we continued on to Mungalala, once or twice weekly Cobb & Co stagecoach route from Roma to Charleville, and then to Morven on the Landsborough Highway. We planned to stop in these towns on our return journey, so continued on to Charleville on the Warrego River. This leg of our journey had taken us through some amazing country, stunning red escarpments, wide floodplains, open grazing and forest country. There were some long stretches of road, sweeping corners and hills to traverse. About half an hour from Charleville, we passed the remains of the old meat processing plant. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Join us next episode as Rick and I explore Charleville and venture further west. Cheers for now, Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.